cognitive empathy is the ability to look into someone else and see that the belief that they have, which might be different than yours, is coming from a set of life experience and genetics, perhaps other issues, spiritual, memory, whatever, that leads them to that conclusion. And if we're really trying to understand difference, it's helpful to know what has in fact influenced them to get there.
Welcome to All Peacemakers Needed video series. I'm Nell Rose Hill, and today I'm with David B. Ostler. We are so grateful that he is with us, and we are so eager to learn about his expertise in peacemaking. Dave has a BUS from the University of Utah and an MBA from Dartmouth College, and he's now retired from a 30-year career as a business executive managing domestic and international businesses focused on improving healthcare. He is the author of 2 books, and today we're talking to him about healing our divides, answering the Savior's call to be peacemakers. Thank you again so much, Dave, for joining us.
Well, thanks, Nell, for your work in terms of hosting these kinds of topics. I really appreciate the grassroots work that people do to make the world a better place. Thank you for being part of that.
Oh, thank you so much. So we like to start our interview just asking our guests a little bit about themselves. And we do like to hear about guests' hobbies if you feel inclined to share.
Well, I kind of think of myself as an unremarkable person. And, I guess my best credential is that I'm a father, a husband. I've got 7 grandchildren. My hobbies, I like to put together jigsaw puzzles of all things. And I've always done that, but certainly the COVID era, everyone became a jigsaw puzzler, and, I refreshed some of my jigsaw puzzling skills. I've put together a 44,000 piece puzzle with my wife and son took us maybe over a year to do. And so I've enjoyed that. I also am a recreational runner, and as you can see from my gray hair, I don't run very fast anymore, but I do enjoy going out for 3 to 5 miles in the morning and enjoying the fresh air. We like to travel. We just got back from a 2-month trip to New Zealand. If you're going to go to New Zealand, you might as well stay there for a while, is what we thought.
Right.
And so we did, and we enjoyed it. And we've enjoyed living in the world. I've lived in Japan and India, and Africa, and London, various parts of the United States. We've always enjoyed getting to know people with different backgrounds, different worldviews, different lived experiences. And, it's kind of humbling when you see how diverse people's experiences are and how they find meaning and joy and happiness in circumstances that are so foreign to what you and I experience living kind of in the United States. So that's a little bit about me.
I love it. I love it. Such a rich life. My 2 daughters live in Northern Virginia right now. And one of those 2 daughters, when she was in high school, we had a jigsaw puzzle on our dining room table the entire time. I think the entire 4 years, or a variety of them, after they finished it. And it was just, they never really sat down. It was just as her friends were coming in and out. So they're like, okay, here's one. Here's another one. But I loved it. I just thought it was so cool to have. And she's framed a few of them, and they were not the size that you're talking about, but still, it was a fun thing for her to do during her high school career with her friends.
We've given up on the 44,000s. We're
okay.
kind of now on the thousands. And they're kind of a gathering place. And, you do a little puzzle, but it's mainly talking and connecting. And that's one of the great parts about it. So
yes. And using your mind too, like getting those wheels turning.
Yeah.
Awesome. And I love that you've traveled so much and learned from people. It's true how much you learn and appreciate. I actually just went recently over this past weekend back to a town we lived in here in the United States, but it'd been 15 years since I lived there. And it was like transformative for me to go back through the memories and to meet with my old friends, and just that experience alone, and reminding myself of how they feel and how they live and have joy in their lives. It's, I think, people are really important to me.
And it kind of is a journey into this topic because, regardless of where I've lived, most people want the same things, right?
Mm-hmm.
They
Yeah.
want health and prosperity. They want to have food on their table.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they have relationships that really matter to them and that they deeply care about. They care about the society they live in and want that society to be nourishing and enabling.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and no one kind of wants to go someplace and live in conflict. No one wants to go someplace and argue with people. We
Right.
have arguments and we do have differences, but I think when we kind of have the perspective that everyone is coming with the same sincere, most everyone, there's a few bad actors, but let's just say most of the people, maybe 99% of the people we interface with are people that want goodness in their lives and the lives of others. And, it's sometimes hard to remember that when we're in the middle of talking about something that we deeply hold and where there's a difference. But if we can reflect upon that and look at someone, and instead of calling them at this label or that label, we look at them and we call them a parent or a spouse or a child or, a caregiver or a protection of the community, then we humanize them, and those differences that sometimes seem so apparent on the surface fade away. Hopefully, they fade away.
Mm-hmm. Yes, what a great reminder. So, can you tell us a little bit more about what inspired you to write this book, Healing Our Divides?
I think there's probably two things. We've lived through an increasing political, religious, social polarization over the last years. I don't know when to go back and say it wasn't there, but
Mm-hmm.
it is there. It's probably always been there, but I think there's some pretty good data that says today is worse than it's been in a long time, and it's increasing, and it's alienating to people that we care about. And perhaps some of us have relationships that have been deeply affected by the differences that are held so importantly by people. And me personally, I didn't feel like I had excuse me, tools to fully deal with that. And I, at times, and still am, it's not like you ever grow out of this. We are human. It's part of being human. But I didn't feel like I had the tools to be able to deal with those kinds of differences. And so I wanted to kind of learn about that. And I realized that when we hear a call from President Nelson, peacemakers needed, and he talks about peacemaking and the important role that that should play in our life as aspirers of spiritual power and wanting to be better. Um, that feels right, but then I don't know what to do with that. I don't know then how to put that in my life. And I think even in the book, at one point, I talked about how we had a word conference and there was a combined meeting with our stake leadership, and there was a lesson that was done on avoiding contention and the like. And I kind of raised my hand and said, I want to avoid contention. How do I do that? Give me the playbook. And um, there wasn't a simple answer in a meeting like that, but that led me to spend time trying to understand it personally and then trying to frame it up so perhaps that understanding would be useful to others.
Yeah, that is one of our goals, is to collect tools, like you were saying, and to figure out like what to do in this situation or that situation, what to say, what not to say. So yeah, that is part of our inspiration too, is to collect these tools and do some deep diving into peacemaking so that we can feel more equipped if to be peacemakers. Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so I have a couple questions specifically about parts of your book that I really enjoyed. So in chapter 3, you talk about biases, and I loved this. This was very informative to me, and you mentioned like several biases. So how can learning about biases help us be better peacemakers?
Yeah, so this was a really interesting chapter for me because, um, I like to think of myself as smart and educated, and I did well in my career, and I held church callings and things like that. And so I kind of come from this place where I think I know a lot. And then when you start getting into the bias section, you realize how difficult it is to kind of perceive a reality. I think I used the scripture in there, though we see through a glass darkly. Did I get that right? It's been a
Yes,
while since I've written the book.
yes, yeah.
We see a clouded view of the world, and
Mhm.
our brains don't see everything as clearly as reality really is. So the life experiences we have cloud the way we see the world. Um, so we call this clouding bias, where we see something and we interpret it in a way that might even be mostly right
Mhm.
or somewhat right or not really right at all.
Right.
And our minds think that it's right. And that usually serves us pretty well. But
Mhm.
there's some things and there's some tendencies in each of us individually and collectively within the human race that cause us not to see things clearly.
Mhm.
And, our minds are amazing. We have millions of pieces of data that come into our minds, and we have to interpret that and filter that out. And as we do that, we lose some aspect of reality there. So there's a lot of different kind of biases that we have, and there might be a dozen. I think I put about a dozen in my book about different things. One of them that we have is something called confirmation bias, where we hear a piece of data or a fact as we think of them that confirms what we believe. We tend to hold on to that. And that fact becomes more important than the other piece of information that we receive that is disconfirming of our belief. So if we believe it, we hold it really tightly. If that misaligns with our belief, then we toss it out. And
Right.
so we to some extent only hear the things that prove what we already believe. And that's
Mhm.
confirmation bias.
I love that scripture, looking through a glass darkly. And in my own personal life, I'm always trying to look through it clearly. When am I going to be able to look through it clearly, look at and see myself as who I really am, and honor my own strengths and weaknesses, and try to do self evaluations that are clear. So I've been using that scriptures in my own like personal journey for a while. So I loved that you used it in the book. I was like, oh yes. And then just like you said, all these biases.
Here's one I suffer from.
Okay.
So, this isn't therapy, Nell, but I appreciate being able to express my own, fragility and my own foibles. And because of my background, because I have an advanced degree, and because I think I had a successful business career, I suffer from something called the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Mhm.
And what that means is that if you're an expert in one area, you think sometimes erroneously that you're an expert in all areas.
Mhm.
And I'm not an expert in immigration. I'm not an expert in um, uh, climate change. I'm not an expert in, pick a political or religious topic. I'm not a biblical expert. Um, I know healthcare and data analytics pretty well. So,
Right.
there I kind of have some credentials and some experience, might make me an expert, but my own mind will grab onto that. And when I hear something in a adjacent or even a distant field, I think I have authority to, opine on it. And I
Mhm.
don't squat when it comes right down to it in those areas. And so, that's a bias I have. And one of the anecdotes to bias And everyone kind of has to find their own way of working through this. But I ask myself when I jump to a conclusion about something, why is it that I really think that's true? And I kind of pause back and try and have perspective saying, well, when someone says this about a topic I really don't know much about, but I'm inclined to come up with an opinion, why do I think I know that? What don't I know? Where would I go and what questions would I ask to help me have better understanding? And it allows me to kind of get out of the knee-jerk reaction where I think I know something, or it confirms a bias, or it confirms the belief. And it helps me say, Dave, you're not really as smart as you think you are. But we're human, and so we have the ability to learn. And how would I learn about that? And what questions would I ask of experts? What questions would I want to know more detail about in order to understand something? That doesn't help me with interpersonal conflict, but it helps me maybe see a little bit more clearly through that dark glass, allows me to pause my certainty and say, I really don't know as much as I think I do about this area. And, that humility then opens you to learning that you wouldn't have if you, just quickly emotionally reacted to that soundbite or that fact or that conversation. So that tool might be helpful for people.
Very helpful. Yeah, we are so blessed to hear from experts like you and all your sage advice. I've been so grateful. All right, so on to another chapter that I really enjoyed was chapter 7. I mean, all the chapters are great, but I pulled out this one part in chapter 7 where you discuss cognitive empathy. Can you explain that a little and how understanding that can also help us be better peacemakers?
Yeah. So cognitive empathy is kind of a concept that is designed to give us as individuals tools to understand where other people are coming from. We arrive at our beliefs in particular ways. Some of these are formed through life experience. Someone who has had, say, a difficult childhood where they're not attached to their parents, will look at authority, will look at the family unit in a different way than someone who has grown up in a home where there's a loving mother and father that are very supportive of someone. And so they just see the world differently, right? And they may see uh, public policy in a different way. They may see spirituality in a different way just because they come from a different background. And it's not just life experience. There's probably genetic components that influence where we come from. I think there's pretty good evidence to say that there's some genetics that cause us to be more ideologically liberal or conservative than others. I think there's been pretty good genetic research on that shows that at least to some degree that is kind of determined and it's built into our brain structures in some ways. And cognitive empathy is the ability to look into someone else and see that the belief that they have, which might be different than yours, is coming from a set of life experience and genetics, perhaps other issues, spiritual memory, whatever, that leads them to that conclusion. And if we're really trying to understand difference, it's helpful to know what has in fact influenced them to get there. If someone, for example, is the subject of violent crime by someone from an immigrant background, they are going to have views on immigration that is different than if someone has more positive experiences with working with people who come from backgrounds outside of the United States. And so understanding where they're coming from, understanding how that shapes their worldview, and having empathy towards them. And that empathy really means I trust and I have understanding that you're arriving at that belief from legitimate reasons within inside yourself, that they are uh, honorable reasons, if you will, that they are legitimate, that leads them to a view that is very different than you because of the life experience that you've had. And, professionally, I had that a little bit. I had a career largely in the United States in healthcare, and then my company transferred me to London to work with international health organizations and government agencies around healthcare. And I came into that position with a life experience built in American healthcare, and living in London with a very different kind of healthcare system. I found that a lot of my prior beliefs, um, were very different than the beliefs that other people had because they came from more of an entitlement, government delivered healthcare environment. And
Right.
so I saw this conflict that was there. And I really tried to understand where people were coming from. And British values are actually very different than American values. British values are very much built on equity and fairness, and American values are really built on individualism.
Mhm.
And so you would see that in the discourse around healthcare and the role of markets versus the role of governments in that. It just illustrated to me when I was sitting down with my lead British
Mhm.
manager, me being her boss as an American manager, the conflicts that we had, we navigated by having, in some ways, a cognitive empathy that we were each coming from a different starting point and each could learn from each other about kind of the differences in the way that we saw that healthcare should work or could work, and how we as a company could bring unique solutions into a marketplace that wouldn't have had these two perspectives on their own.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that you are, sharing a real world experience of using a peacemaking tool, of understanding about cognitive empathy. Things when I was reading the chapter that came to my mind, one is the importance of listening to people or asking questions, trying to find out what their background or their ideology. So I think it's important to listen to people and ask questions and be genuinely curious, about what they're doing. So the last chapter of the book, you quoted this really sweet quote that I had never heard before from Dr. Seuss. And the quote is, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not, unquote. So how can we, as everyday peacemakers who aren't experts, how can we actually make a difference?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I have a perfect answer for that
Yeah,
because we aspire to change the world, right?
right,
And at
right.
times it's a pretty toxic world.
Mm,
And many of the places where we interact online, online interaction doesn't have a lot of the moderators that we have in face-to-face and
right.
interpersonal relationships with families and friends. People can be their very worst, on social media, and
Mhm,
even if it's not anonymized, even if it's
right,
people I grew up with or went to high school with, and
right.
so I sometimes, and it depends on the person, we simply avoid some of those areas. I am still on social media, but there's a couple of platforms I won't participate in
Mhm,
because their whole business model is to create contention.
right. Yeah.
It's not dialogue, it's contention.
Mhm,
It's to own the other person. It's to, go viral with an insult.
right. Yeah.
And if there's a business that has that kind of at their core business model, I'm not real interested in giving them my clicks and my likes and my read this and that. Um, so I think it's okay to decide for ourselves what medium, what
Mhm,
settings we are able to do this work. there's some people that are really gifted that can do this in a more national way. Um, I know there was a lesson at LDS uh, at church on the fifth Sunday where
Mhm,
there was kind of a discussion about
mhm,
um, working more together. I think the word might be pluralism that would
mhm,
kind of capture that. I noticed in a Deseret News article that came out, this is the LDS Church's newspaper. They don't
mhm.
control it, but it's
Right.
tightly affiliated. There was a discussion between Judge Thomas Griffith, who was a Bush appointee and retired from the DC Circuit Court of Appeals, and Katrina Lantos Sweat, who was a Democrat from New Hampshire. She was in the House. And, they were talking about how important it is to be able to communicate and work within difference. So you have some of these people that are able to do that at a national platform. Credit to them. That dialogue needs to happen. There's
Yeah.
some groups that are out there. I think I'm just a regular Dave. And so the way I need to do that is the way, I relate to family members, some of which have very different beliefs, religiously, politically, worldview, however you want to categorize that, they have very different ones. And I think I always have to go into those conversations. Um, Again, retreating back to that introduction where I see them as a child of God. I see them as a person having legitimate concerns about the issues that matter to them. And because of that, I accept them from a place of legitimacy, as opposed to someone who I might say, um, is ill-informed, is an enemy, is, a bad guy, whatever term you want to use that is an alienating term. I try and get that out of my mind. And I try and
Mhm,
think of them as, a child of God,
mhm,
a human being, someone who has disappointments and frustrations as well as successes in their lives. And that allows me to, I think, have a more legitimate conversation with them, um, a more caring conversation, and probably a conversation that isn't really designed to point out the things they're believing that are wrong.
Right.
That
Yeah.
if that is the basis of the conversation, and sometimes we need to have those conversations. It's a different approach, a different way of interacting. So we find common ground. We talk about
Mhm,
things that work for both of us. And then if we're in, I'm trying to change my neighbor's mind. I think we also have to do that legitimately with peacemaking tools, with cognitive empathy, and there's other tools that are in the book to be able to exchange perspectives. And in the process, we have to be open enough that we can remove our own biases and we can learn from the person with a different perspective, because I guarantee you, none of our beliefs are 100% accurate.
mhm.
They even me with the expertise I have in one narrow area, I'm still learning in that area. And so when we're in a setting where we're trying to change someone's mind, we too have to be open that some of our prior beliefs need to evolve, to incorporate information, to overcome some of the limitations that our own life experiences caused us to misperceive some sort of reality.
I think it's great when we are in those interactions, just trying to pull from those tools that we're trying to learn about common ground, recognizing our own biases, seeing people with dignity. And so I think all of those things that we could all do, anybody can do that. We don't have to necessarily be an expert or study it. We can all work on that and try to evolve. And I loved how you said earlier on that we want, when we go into situations, we don't really want to have conflict. We don't want to be in conflict. I do encourage our listeners to read the book, and we'll give all the links to your book and everything in the video notes. Is there anything else as we wrap up that you'd like to share with us?
Thanks for the work you and others are doing. It delights me that yes, it's been a couple of years since my book is out, that it's a part of your grassroots movement to be able to make this a better world. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Dave. We're so grateful again to have you. Thank you so much for joining us on All Peacemakers Needed.